I'm Kai, TFT YouTuber, content creator, educator, and streamer. Today, we're here to answer some of your questions from the internet. This is TFT support. Rayleigh asks, what even is TFT? TFT is an auto battler or auto chess, which is a subgenre of strategy games. It's basically a 1v8 or a free-for-all, and you are trying to create the strongest board possible to try and beat out the rest of your opponents. The easiest way I like to describe the game is like thinking about it like it's chess, except unlike chess, where you get to play whatever opening you like, whether that be the Queen's Gambit, or maybe the Accelerated Dragon, or the Sicilian. In TFT, you do not get to choose your opening, the game chooses the opening for you. Some games you get a Queen's Gambit, some games you get a Sicilian, some games you get the Carl Khan. It's up to you as a player to build the best board that you can build based off what the game decides to feed you. It's easily my favorite game of all time, and if you've never played it before, I highly recommend trying it out. Roof asks, how does someone get into TFT and learn to play the game? What happens in between being a first-time novice to being in Diamond or even Masters? What is the difference in low-rate games versus high-ranked games? So to get into TFT, you just gotta get your feet wet. You can learn and read and watch as much as you want, but until you actually get your feet wet, you are not gonna be able to play the game very well. You should just hop right in. What happens though is that when you are a first-time novice, you are still learning the game, learning all of the units, learning the abilities, the traits, the augments, the itemizations. Again, it seems like a very information-dense game, but the reality is it's actually quite the opposite. You will pick things up very quickly. But as you progress and you play the game more, suddenly you're learning the units, you're learning the items, you've learned everything. And now it's all about the efficiency at which you are able to build your strongest board. As you climb higher and higher up the ranks, people are becoming more and more efficient at building their strongest board. And because you are fighting against people who are building stronger boards quicker, you will be taking more player damage per loss the higher you climb. The average gravity of these losses per round is usually what we like to refer to as lobby tempo. The higher you climb, the higher the tempo of each lobby will become. And if you've ever played in a challenger lobby before, you know how crazy the tempo can become. High on Strife asks, how can soju be so good yet so bad at the same time? So for those of you who are uninitiated or don't know who soju is, soju or K3 soju is, at the time of recording this video, the most popular and most well-known TFT player. A lot of people like to say that he's actually not that great of a player because of the amount of blunders that this guy makes on stream. If you ever watched a stream before, you can see him do some egregious mistakes. But if you've ever watched this guy play in tourney, you know this guy can be an absolute beast and is probably one of the best efficient players when it comes to securing top fours. So in short, bro knows how to have a good time on stream and play like an absolute beast off stream or in competition. KnightCM77 asks, I have no idea how qiyana works. I want to one-trick her and understand the best spot for her. Kai, you are my only hope. Well, I will do my best. So first off, if you want to try to one-trick a 5-cost, good fucking luck. That's not gonna happen. It's very difficult to do. It's very unlikely, especially if you're trying to climb competitively. But just so we understand what she does as a unit though, she is a crowd diver true damage 5-cost champion. The way her ability works is that she will basically just ult a target, and then if that target was holding an item, she will copy that item and put that item onto one of your allies. But if the unit that she targeted, her opponent, right? If the target that she ults doesn't have an item, she just does bonus damage to them and just flies them across the board. But keep in mind, she is a true damage champion, and true damage units get what's called a bling bonus if they are equipped with at least one component or one item. If qiyana's bling bonus is in fact activated, when she casts her ability on an opposing unit that is carrying an item, and it dies, then qiyana is able to actually farm you a permanent component for the rest of the game for you to utilize. The most common approach for playing qiyana efficiently, at least at the time of recording this video, at the highest level of play, is to simply play her with at least 4 crowd diver activated and making sure the bling bonus is activated by having true damage activated as well. Normally, you want to itemize her with at least an Edge of Night plus 2 damage items and placing her in front of the opponent's strongest tank that is ideally itemized. qiyana will then just keep ulting the tankiest tank on the opponent's team and farming your tank's infinite frontline items. Yogi, I love that name, asks, what scenarios do I take the blank slate augment and how do I play blank slate? I got offered the augment at 4-2 and pulled a Raditz rolling at 9 with 20 gold. So you just level to 8 and roll. Thanks. For those of you who don't know, what she calls pulling a Raditz is that back during the PvE, Raditz is a very well-known streamer in the North American community who took blank slate, went level to 9 just to play a Katarina on his board and nothing else. Bro went the fastest 8th of his life. But when it comes to the blank slate augment, there are 2 main approaches for this augment. The first one is if your spot is fucking doomed. If you think that your game is basically super fucked, you take blank slate, you go level 8, and you roll to try to stabilize with a very solid 2-star 4-cost board. Ideally, you want to lean into whatever is the current meta board. After you have hard stabilized, ideally by 4-2, so you pivot your board within 1 turn, you try to go 9 afterwards and see if you're able to secure a top 4 from your spot. Although if your early game and mid game was so shit that you had to resort to blank slate, chances are you are fighting for a 6th or 5th place at best. The second scenario is if you have been win streaking basically the whole game. Starting from the beginning at stage 1 all the way to 4-2, you are Mr. 100, you have built up all this economy, and now 4-2 is hit, you're given blank slate, sayonara bitches, it's a fast 9, you get a Bill Gates cap out 2-star all your legendaries, and it's basically a GG for free. And that is also partially the reason why I think this augment should be removed, because I think it's very unhealthy in terms of competitive integrity. But for the average for fun player, it's pretty fucking fun. Any other scenario, I wouldn't recommend taking blank slate. In general, this isn't an augment you really take unless you are at either two ends of an extremity. At Frodan asks, how are you so skilled and yet so stylish? What can I do to be like you? Parentheses, delete this part after you reply. Thanks, Frodan. Congratulations on your kid. That's all I gotta say. At CatLeonT, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that, asks, how do I beat someone going fast 9 when I've capped out my reroll comp? The short answer is you don't. The whole point of a reroll comp is to ideally settle for a board that is super strong and competitive in the end game in case you are unable to find yourself going level 8 and level 9. The problem is that if somebody was able to go level 9 and play a legendary board, chances are they will outcap you. So in short, pray to God that you don't fight into them and hope that whenever you are not fighting into a fast 9 player, you're able to beat the other players instead because you are in fact still playing a very strong capped out reroll board. At Lauren Wu asks, how much gold should you have before open selling your headliner? Should I even open sell my headliner? What are the standard leveling intervals, i.e. not fast 9, and are there any positioning tips? This is a loaded fucking tweet, so let's go over this one by one. First off, should you ever open sell your headliner? And the answer is yes. There are going to be some instances where you should try and open sell your headliner. For example, let's say you have been win streaking with a Corki 2 headliner this whole time. Now it's 3-7, you're going into 4-1. Chances are you should probably open sell the Corki and try to roll for a stronger headliner, because whatever you may find within a couple of rolls will probably already be stronger than that Corki. In terms of how much gold you should actually have though before open selling your headliner, there's no general rule of thumb, but if you're gonna open sell it, you should be pretty open-minded to whatever comes your way within 3 to 5 rolls. Now, in terms of standard leveling intervals, it's a little difficult to say because it changes every single set. Instead of thinking about standard leveling intervals, it might actually be better to think about standard intervals instead. But standard intervals are generally speaking rounds where you should consider potentially spiking the power of your board. The standard interval for every game of TFT is the 1st, 2nd, and 5th round of every single stage. So you can think about, okay, let's say on 2-5, what is the best way for me to spike my board, or the most efficient way of using my gold? Is it to roll for upgrades? Is it to level? Or maybe I just sit around and wait until the next standard interval to think about how I want to be spiking the power of my board. But in case you don't want to hear me yap about how you should critically assess your position, and you just want a very quick rundown guide, which you should not be using this every single game, by the way. This is just a very rough standard leveling guide, okay? Rough, okay? Don't blame me for your losses, all right? 3-5 level 7, 4-2 level 8, 5-2 level 9. Yes, that is technically fast 9, but standard intervals change per patch, per set. It depends on what is meta. And finally, for any positioning tips, I will leave you with one because you got like 3 questions in one here. My one positioning tip for set 10 is, please, for the love of God, stop putting your carry at D1 in the corner hex. Put it in D3, D4, or D5, which is in the middle part of the back row. The reason I say this is because there's a lot of punishment that exists for cornering your carry. Akali and crowd divers are the 2 big ones. I've seen Karthus 3 lose to a 4 crowd diver board before because this idiot did not decide to put his Karthus in the middle, and I got punished for his mistake because that crowd diver player should have died like eons ago. I'm not salty, but I'm just saying, if you were a little smarter, you could have saved me, bro. But anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. Put your carries in the middle. At I'm Last Light asks, help, my stage 3 is hell. I'm either full win streaking or negative 50 HP. LOL. Probably a headliner issue, but I'm not sure. Your success during stage 3 is reliant on 2 things. First, it's your stage 2. how did stage 2 go? Did you win streak all of it? Did you lose streak all of it? Did you mix streak? How did that go? How did that set you up for success for stage 3? The second part is dependent on whether or not you have a game plan, because a lot of people actually don't think critically enough about their game plan for stage 3. On 3-2, are you rolling? On 3-1, are you rolling? On 3-5, are you rolling? Are you leveling? These are things you need to be asking yourself. So going into stage 3 with a concrete plan or an idea as to how you want to approach it will help alleviate your issues immensely. In short, you should be thinking about when your board is going to be spiking on stage 3 and how that's going to set you up for success later down the line. At iWincel asks, when do you deviate from standard leveling intervals during the early game? I fucking love this question, so let's talk about it. First off, to deviate from the norm means you need to understand the norm. So understanding the norm means understanding how standard interval works, and if you understand that, because we've gone over it, then you now know how to critically assess your position and when you should be normally leveling. But because now we understand this, when do we deviate? And deviating means knowing the rules so we can break them. And when do we break rules? We break them when they make sense. So for example, let's say you know your level 4 board, it's mediocre, it's not the strongest, but your level 5 board is so strong that you are itching to go level 5 because you know that as soon as you're level 5, you're winning every single fight. If that's the scenario, try Bebe leveling. Try to go level 5 at 2-2 or even 2-3, a little earlier before standard. And if you do so, you can make the justification that because you know you're going to secure a 5 win streak during this stage, that streak money will pay you back and you will actually be making more money because you chose to level early. So in short, if you're gonna deviate from standard leveling, you should have a pretty good reason. At VGC Corner asks, is it better to force a comp or to be flexible? I used to try to be flexible, but back in set 3, I reached diamond by forcing mechs. In my head, it makes more sense to be flexible to whatever the game gives you, but for some reason, it's much harder than just forcing specific meta comps. You are correct. It is much harder to play flexibly than it is to force meta boards. The easiest way to think about this is, let's say you're working on a project. It's a lot easier to create a project if you know what your end goal is going to look like, and all you have to do is just gather the ingredients to make your end goal, rather than just using whatever ingredients are given to you and trying to build a product of the same quality that you're aiming for. So yes, while it is easier to climb and force comps, and historically speaking, at least from what I understand, you can actually hard force one comp and actually make it to as high as diamond, but you will reach a wall very quickly. If you want to improve at TFT and to be better at the game, you should consider not one-tricking and trying to find different ways to play flexibly and increase your fundamental knowledge as a TFT player. At Wooback asks, how much pre-planning goes into every game? For example, I have a bunch of comps I know that are good in the back of my head, and every game I play one of them depending on what I hit. That's a lot of preparation. I noticed that high-level players are able to play way more flexibly than I can and mix and match comps way more. So this is actually a pretty good question because yes, in the pro scene, we do study. We study different lines, we study different statistics, we study different variations, and there is a lot of studying that goes in and VOD reviewing before we actually hop into the games ourselves. But pre-planning only gives you a very slight edge. I would argue that as long as you know what the meta boards are and you know what augments in general are strong, you will have success, and you can actually even make it all the way up to Challenger if you don't plan that hard. You just have to know the basics of what's going on. But the reason why high-level players are able to actually play more flexibly is because they're not thinking about their board holistically, they're thinking about their board in terms of clusters. Clusters, if you're unaware, are just core units of 3, 4, 5, sometimes even 6 units, and then they're building boards around said cluster. A lot of pro players like to memorize small clusters of units that work well together and then trying to build around them either by conjoining more clusters together or having one main one and then building around it. Set 10 rewards a lot of flexible play, so I highly recommend trying to look into clusters if pre-planning is something you're trying to look into. But like I said before, it does not give you that much of an edge, it's only very so slight. At Guerra077 asks, how do we criticize ourselves when we are VOD reviewing our games, and when criticizing streamer games, what aspects should we pay more attention to? So to answer your question, let's think about the latter half of the question first, and then we'll revisit VOD reviewing ourselves. So first off, when you are VOD reviewing a pro player or any streamer, like high elo streamers games, you should be asking yourself, what would I do? So the best way to approach this is that as soon as they get into stage 1 is actually very important. Even as soon as they load into stage 1, as soon as that first shot pops up, ask yourself, what would you buy in that position? What lines are you already thinking about based off the components that were dropped? You should think about the decisions that you would make and then unpause the VOD and watch what the pro player does. See how your reasoning lines up with theirs and see whether or not you guys are on the same page or not. most often you will not be on the same page, and you should ask yourself, why do we not agree on this decision? Trying to understand their line of reasoning will help improve you immensely as a player. Now, going back to VOD reviewing ourselves, the best way to think about it is to think about, okay, we just VOD reviewed this pro player. They did XYZ decision, right? Did I follow the same line of reasoning that they did in my own game? And trying to see how you can emulate their line of reasoning in your own gameplay, and you will see that you probably do not align with their reasoning very often. It's a very easy way to improve as a player, and VOD reviewing yourself is a fantastic way if you want to try and climb the ranks. At Karasu_TYV asks, how do you evaluate your economic situation? I would watch streamers and they would say I'm too broke, but in my eyes, that fact isn't so obvious to me. I have a hard time evaluating if I'm rich or too poor, depending on the stage especially. So this is a very difficult question to answer, especially for newer and intermediate players, but I will do my best to try to explain. A lot of pro players and high elo streamers are able to identify what is the most idealistic board that they can hit and what is the most realistic board that they can hit, and being able to visualize what goes on in between and aiming for that in between. That in between, if you are playing standard, will leave you at either level 8 or at level 9. Once you've evaluated the most likely outcome at which level you are going to end on, now you have to think about when you're actually going to be able to hit that level and when you're going to be able to start looking for your units, start looking for your upgrades. If, for example, let's say you are level 7 at 3-5, but you only have 10 gold, and you think that you are probably going to end the game at level 8, it is going to be a very long ways away to try to end on level 8 and try to find the units that you're looking for without losing too much HP and bleeding out due to the tempo of the lobby. So at the end of the day, a lot of high elo players are taking a bunch of factors into consideration to try and evaluate whether or not their economic situation is going to be suitable for securing a top 4 within that particular lobby. At A Blanket Ghost asks, how do you get used to scouting, and what stages should you absolutely do it? So the best way to get used to scouting is to just start scouting. But the best way to do it, in my opinion, is actually by going into your keybind settings and binding every single person's board to a specific key on your keyboard. I have a whole video dedicated to talking about keybinds if you want to go check it out, but I highly recommend it if you want to go try and get better at scouting. Now, in terms of when you should absolutely do it, it should be every round. You should be able to scout every single round at the highest level of play. But if that is not the case, you should at the very least be scouting absolutely on standard intervals. Ideally, again, like we had said before, the first, second, or fifth round of every stage. The reason being is that standard intervals are when people are likely spiking their boards, so you want to be looking out for those spikes and also the direction that a lot of these players are going. At VexZ_EC asks, how do you preserve HP early game when so many people hit early strong boards without sacrificing all of your econ? So there's two main ways to approach this. One, you don't have to actually preserve your HP. You can actually just try to aim for a lose streak instead if you know you are probably not going to be playing a strong board, and look for economic losses instead and spiking at a later stage. But the second approach is to actually watch the way that you play your stage 1 and your stage 2. Especially, see if whether or not you are holding onto strong unit quality during the early parts of the game. The easiest way to know what units are strong and what units are weak amongst the 1 cost and 2 cost is to watch pro players and see what they evaluate as the strongest units during the early game. The units you decide to hold throughout the early game will dictate and help you decide whether or not you are going to be playing a strong board for stage 2. What units you decide to hold and what pairs you decide to hold will immensely change the way that your early game will be approached and how much HP you end up losing. At LOL Powerhouse asks, can you climb by spamming 1 comp? The answer, funny enough, is actually yes, but it's not in the sense that you think. One tricking in TFT is a very, very difficult thing to do. It's not easy because of the amount of variance that exists within the game, and especially during set 10, it's very difficult to play and spam 1 comp to climb when the set rewards flexibility so much. It is a very complicated topic, so I will link a video discussing how you can one-trick a composition if that's something you want to keep in mind, but I would argue it's harder to one-trick a composition than it is to just try and play flexibly. But that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you for everybody who asked your questions over on Twitter, and I just also want to say a big thank you to anybody who plays TFT, watches TFT, supports TFT in any way, shape, or form. Until next time, thank you guys for watching. This has been TFT Support. Take care, guys. Happy climbing.